Sit back and enjoy 2 hours of fascinating facts you didn't know. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. Candle wicks have an asymmetrical braid. As they burn, they bend toward that side. Before that invention, the wick had to be trimmed every few hours because the candle would smoke. The beauty of the modern design is that the tip of the wick bends into the hottest part of the flame, where it ends up burning itself away instead of building up carbon. That is why they are called self-trimming wicks. That small change made candles much cleaner and more practical because it reduced soot, prevented misshapen flames, and eliminated a household annoyance that had been completely normal for centuries. The whole idea of drinking 8 glasses of water a day comes from a 1945 recommendation that actually has no solid medical basis. The current recommendation is to drink when you are thirsty, unless you are outside on a hot day or you are an older adult, in which case drink a little more. In 2016, scientists discovered the tail of a 99-million-year-old dinosaur filled with feathers, perfectly preserved in amber. The specimen came from Myanmar and preserved not only the feathers, but also bones, soft tissue, and microscopic pigments that helped reconstruct its brownish coloring. Unlike the stiff feathers of modern birds, these were softer and fluffier, reinforcing the idea that, in many dinosaurs, feathers first appeared as insulation or ornament rather than as a tool for flight. Fish eggs can survive and hatch after passing through a duct, which helps explain how isolated and seemingly pristine bodies of water can end up populated with fish. In laboratory tests, researchers recovered intact eggs and living embryos of species such as carp after they passed through ducks' digestive systems, and some later hatched. It does not seem like a very efficient method, but in nature it only has to work a few times. It also helps explain why temporary ponds, remote lagoons, or newly formed pools can end up containing fish without human intervention. A man created a fake restaurant on TripAdvisor and asked acquaintances for positive reviews. Over time, the fake restaurant became the #1 restaurant in London and was receiving as many as 100 calls a day for reservations. For one day, the man set up a cafe in his backyard and served frozen food, earning rave reviews. Because the brown tree snake has no natural predators or other controls in Guam, it multiplied rapidly and has nearly wiped out Guam's native forest birds. The snakes also climb power lines and cause costly blackouts and electrical damage. China built imitation versions of many European cities, such as Paris, which they call Tianducheng. This development, built near Hangzhou, includes a roughly 354-foot Eiffel Tower, Parisian-style avenues, and buildings inspired by Haussmann architecture. For years, it became famous as a ghost city because of its low occupancy, but over time, it ended up attracting more residents and stopped being just a tourist oddity. And Tianducheng was not an isolated case. China also built replicas inspired by Hallstatt, Venice, and English villages as part of that curious craze for so-called duplitecture. Ball Corporation, famous for its glass jars, became a defense and aerospace engineering manufacturer. Its products have been used in the F-35 fighter jet and the James Webb Space Telescope, among other projects. It no longer directly produces glass jars. The ocean contains 352 quintillion gallons of water. Put another way, it holds around 97% of all the water on the planet, so almost all of Earth's water is there, and on top of that, it is salty. The figure is so absurd that it is hard to wrap your head around. It equals more than 1,300,000,000 cubic kilometers of water. And even with that enormous volume, most marine life is concentrated in a relatively thin layer near the surface, where sunlight can still reach. The evolutionary leap from egg-laying to placental birth may have been helped by the DNA of an ancient retrovirus. It encoded a protein that allowed the cells around the placenta to fuse, blocking maternal-fetal blood exchange and preventing the mother's immune system from harming the fetus. In approximately 6 weeks, a transplanted section of liver will grow into a normal-sized, fully functional liver inside the recipient, while the donor's remaining liver will regenerate to replace the transplanted section. The close relative of the extinct dodo, the Victoria crowned pigeon, still exists and is the second largest member of its family after the dodo. This bird from New Guinea can reach a striking size for a modern pigeon, with a fan-shaped crest that makes it unmistakable and a presence that feels both elegant and prehistoric. Both it and the dodo belong to the Columbidae family, the same one as common pigeons, and genetic analyses helped confirm that relationship, which for centuries seemed strange because of the dodo's very different appearance. Venus flytraps grow their flowers far away from themselves to avoid killing their pollinators. In this species, the white flowers grow on long stalks that raise the bloom several inches above the traps, a separation that reduces the risk of useful insects like bees and hoverflies being accidentally captured. The plant also does not depend on its prey to eat in the usual sense. Photosynthesis remains its main source of energy, while insects provide nitrogen and other nutrients that are scarce in the swampy soils where it naturally lives. Kurt Cobain's 1959 Martin acoustic guitar used during the MTV Unplugged performance sold at auction in 2020 for $6 million. That makes it not only the most valuable guitar, but also the most valuable piece of rock music memorabilia of all time. In 2015, a fan of the Australian band Peking Duck managed to get backstage at one of their concerts by adding himself as a family member on their Wikipedia page and showing it to security. The band did not even mind and said they ended up drinking a bunch of beers with him and that he was an absolute legend. Jeopardy contestant James Holzhauer is the third highest earning American game show contestant of all time, with $3.52 million. He also holds the record for the highest single game winnings with $131,127. He's the first and only player to win $100,000 or more in a single episode, and he accomplished this feat 6 times. Lawrence Tureau professionally named himself Mr. T because he hated how his father, his uncle, and his brother, who had returned from Vietnam, were dismissively called boy by white people. He wanted the first word out of everyone's mouth to be Mr. when speaking to him. The black hole Ton 618 is so enormous, at 66 billion solar masses, that a new term had to be invented to describe it: the ultra-massive black hole. That term is used for monsters that far exceed the typical range of the supermassive black holes found at galactic centers, and Ton 618 is in a league of its own even within that group. It is the engine of a hyperluminous quasar, visible from billions of light-years away, and its event horizon would be so enormous that, if placed at the center of our solar system, it would extend beyond the orbit of Neptune. Whipping Tom of 1681 was the nickname given to an attacker who targeted women in London. He waited for a woman to be alone, surprised her, lifted her dress, and struck her before running away. To try to catch him, some watchmen dressed in women's clothing and patrolled the areas where he was known to operate. The Japanese island of Iwo Jima has grown by approximately 3.5 square miles since the Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. The growth is not due to landfills or reverse erosion, but to the constant push of its volcanic system, which has been lifting the land and creating new surface area over the decades. In fact, the island has changed so much that some beaches where troops landed during the war are now higher than they were back then. And in recent years, volcanic activity even formed a small new island nearby. The FBI and the CIA recruit heavily from the Mormon population because they are generally cheaper to investigate for a security clearance, often speak other languages because of their missionary travel, and usually have a low-risk lifestyle. The original story of Aladdin was set in China, and he was, in fact, Chinese. In the oldest known versions, the story begins in a city of China, and Aladdin appears as the son of a Chinese tailor, although the tale mixes that setting with clearly Islamic and Middle Eastern-flavored elements. In fact, that oddity is part of what makes it so fascinating. The villain is an African magician, the ruler is a sultan, and the world of the story feels less like real China and more like an imagined China, filtered through the tradition of 1001 Nights. A quiet American prisoner of war was nicknamed incredibly stupid by his Vietnamese captors. After returning to the United States, he provided the names of more than 200 prisoners of war that he had memorized to the tune of "Old MacDonald Had a Farm." We do not know what the Romans actually called the Colosseum. The name Colosseum is medieval and appears to derive from Nero's enormous colossus that stood near the amphitheater, not from the building itself. In Roman times, it was formally known as the Flavian Amphitheater, after the dynasty that oversaw its construction after Nero's reign. Even so, that still does not resolve what ordinary people called it in daily conversation. The Romans may have used nicknames, abbreviations, or popular references that were not clearly recorded in the surviving sources. After Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, his funeral was held at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. and a small group of current students were chosen to serve as ushers. One of those ushers was Samuel L. Jackson. To host the Super Bowl, host cities must provide the NFL with exclusive access to 3 high-quality 18-hole golf courses in the area at no cost so that a tournament can be held during Super Bowl weekend. Schwarzenegger pretended to be interested in the movie Stop or My Mom Will Shoot in order to trick Stallone into starring in it. Stallone later called it maybe one of the worst movies in the entire solar system, including alien productions we have never seen. Camels have 3 eyelids to protect themselves from wind-blown sand in the desert. In addition to their 2 outer eyelids, they have a nictitating membrane, a kind of translucent third eyelid that can cover the eye without completely blocking vision. That allows them to keep navigating even during sandstorms. Their eyelashes also play an important role. They are long, dense, and form an extra barrier against dust. Combined with nostrils that can partially close, their whole face is built to withstand a brutally dry and sandy environment. There is a restaurant in New York called Enoteca Maria that does not employ chefs. They employ grandmothers. Each day, a different grandmother from a different part of the world designs her own menu. The place opened in Staten Island and started with Italian nonnas, but over the years, it expanded the idea into a rotation of cooks from very different countries, from Japan to Peru to Azerbaijan. Part of the charm is that many of them prepare family recipes that had never left their homes, so the menu changes not just by country, but by the personal history of whoever is cooking that day. There is a volcano on Mars called Olympus Mons that is approximately 2.5 times taller than Mount Everest and about the diameter of France. Its height is around 13.7 miles from the surrounding Martian plain, and its base stretches across about 370 miles. What is impressive is not just its size, but the type of volcano it is. A shield volcano, similar in shape to the ones in Hawaii but taken to an absurd scale. On Mars, it was able to grow so large because gravity is lower than on Earth, and in addition, the planet has no active plate tectonics to shift the crust and shut off the volcano by moving it away from its source of magma. Joseph Bazalgette, the man who designed London's sewers in the 1860s, said they were only going to do this once and that there is always room for the unexpected, so he doubled the diameter of the pipes. If he had not done that, the system would have overflowed in the 1960s, and it is still in use today. Some of St. Nicholas's, or Santa Claus's, bones were once gifted to a church in New York City by Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Unfortunately, both the church and the bones were destroyed on September 11th. Astronomer Harlow Shapley firmly believed there was only one galaxy in the universe, but when he was presented with evidence disproving that view, he said it destroyed his universe. He then completely changed his outlook and devoted the rest of his career to mapping 76,000 galaxies. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not allowed to dub his own role in Terminator into German because his accent is considered very rural by German-Austrian standards, and it would have been too ridiculous to have a killing machine from the future that comes from the past and sounds like a farmer. United States zip codes, as we know them, began in the 1960s. The zip code system was launched by the Postal Service in 1963 to speed up the automatic sorting of mail at a time when the volume of letters and packages was growing rapidly. They even created a mascot named Mr. Zip to teach the public how to use them, because many people did not understand what those new numbers were for. Later, in the 1980s, the Zip +4 format was added to make delivery even more precise. There is an annual income requirement of 2,000 pesos to become president of Argentina that was established in 1853. However, because it is not adjusted for inflation, it is now the equivalent of $2.50 instead of the original 7.1 ounces of gold, which would be about $220,000. An average silverback can lift 800 pounds, and its grip can crush a crocodile's skull. They are 4 to 9 times stronger than the average human male. Much of that strength is in the back, shoulders, and arms because gorillas spend their days climbing, tearing apart tough vegetation, and moving their enormous weight around on their knuckles. They also have an incredibly powerful bite and impressive muscle density for their size. Even so, silverbacks rarely seek out a fight. Many times, a chest beat, a short charge, or a hard stare is enough to settle a conflict without actual combat. George Miller had his wife, Margaret Sixel, edit the movie Mad Max Fury Road. Miller said that she had never edited an action movie before, and that if it had been edited by the usual kind of men, it would look like any other action movie we see. She went on to win an Academy Award for her editing work on that film. NASA has its own SWAT team. More precisely, several of the agency's centers have tactical response units within their protective services designed for situations such as active shooters, hostage incidents, or armed intruders at sensitive facilities. At the Kennedy Space Center, for example, that group is known as the Emergency Response Team, and NASA itself has described it as its version of a SWAT team. It makes sense when you think about what they protect: launch pads, spacecraft, fuel, laboratories, and critical personnel. Keanu Reeves often gives up part of his salary so that producers can bring in other notable actors. On The Devil's Advocate, he cut his salary by a few $1,000,000 so they could afford Al Pacino. And he did the same on The Replacements so he could work with Gene Hackman. Dr. Phil lost his license to practice psychology in 2006. Therefore, every guest on his television show has to sign a contract stating that they are only there to receive advice from an individual, not from a psychologist. Gloria Stewart, who played the elderly Rose in Titanic, reached the age of 100 and died in 2010. She remains the oldest nominee in the Academy Award category for Best Supporting Actress, a distinction she earned at the age of 86. In 1960, cats were parachuted into Borneo to fight a rat infestation, and at least on a small scale, the operation was considered a success. What is interesting is that the version about 14,000 cats appears to be a later exaggeration. Accounts from the time speak of only a few dozen, not thousands. The operation began after insecticide campaigns to fight malaria disrupted the local ecosystem, caused the rat population to explode, and forced officials to look for a solution as absurd as it was memorable. Metallica's song Master of Puppets reached both number 40 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 22 on the United Kingdom singles chart for the first time in July of 2022, after the 1986 metal classic was prominently featured in the finale of the 4th season of Stranger Things. Although Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of electronic television, was disappointed by it for most of his life, he changed his mind the day he saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon thanks to his invention, telling his wife that this had made it all worthwhile. Experts say you should not actually use soap to wash your anus because it strips away the natural oils that protect it. The perianal area has very delicate skin, and when it is irritated by scented soaps, fragranced wipes, or excessive scrubbing, it can develop itching, burning, and even small fissures. That is why many guidelines recommend gentle cleaning with warm water, or, if needed, a very mild unscented cleanser, always drying by patting instead of rubbing. Sometimes the problem is not a lack of hygiene, but precisely too much cleaning. The show within The Simpsons, The Itchy and Scratchy Show, is not actually based on Tom and Jerry. It is based on a darker cartoon called Herman and Catnip, which was known for being violent and malicious. Marlon Brando, who played a human in the movie The Island of Dr. Moreau, insisted that he wanted to take off his hat at the end of the film and reveal that he had been a dolphin the whole time, but the director refused. TurboTax's free version was not always truly free. For years, its free edition applied only to very simple tax returns, while the IRS Free File program offered no-cost filing to taxpayers with low or moderate incomes. The controversy arose because TurboTax was accused of marketing a service as free, even though in many cases it redirected users to paid versions, leading to lawsuits, penalties, and heavy criticism for deceptive practices. There is a man with the last name Innocent on the FBI's most wanted list. He is Vitel Innocent, a Haitian gang leader for whom the FBI at one point offered a reward of up to $2 million for information leading to his capture. The NFL once created a committee to manipulate information in order to hide brain damage in its players. More specifically, it was the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, created in the 1990s, whose studies were harshly criticized years later for omitting more than 100 diagnosed concussions and presenting a far less serious picture than what was actually happening. The scandal became so large because for years the league used that work to downplay the link between repeated blows to the head and long-term neurological problems, until public pressure, lawsuits, and medical evidence finally backed it into a corner. A mule always has a donkey father and a horse mother. The offspring of a horse father and a donkey mother is called a hinny. Although both are hybrids between a horse and a donkey, they are not usually the same. Mules are much more common because that combination tends to produce animals that are stronger, tougher, and more useful for work, while hinnies are rarer and often have a less advantageous build. Both are usually sterile because of the chromosomal difference between horses and donkeys, but they inherit an unusual mix of traits, such as the endurance of a donkey and some of the size and musculature of a horse. Since domestication, dogs' eyes have changed. Dogs now have eye muscles that make them more expressive and more baby-like. These same muscles are absent in wolves, their closest relatives. Specifically, one of the most cited changes is a muscle that lets them raise the inner part of the eyebrow and make those famous puppy dog eyes that enlarge the look of their gaze. Researchers believe that expression may have been favored because it triggers a caregiving response in humans, so dogs with more readable expressions may have had an advantage while living alongside us. 4 states specifically mention paranormal activity in their real estate disclosure laws: New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. The interesting part is that they do not all treat it the same way. In Massachusetts and Minnesota, the law basically protects the seller by making it clear that they are not required to disclose alleged paranormal phenomena, while in New Jersey, the answer must be given honestly if the buyer asks directly. The most famous case is in New York, where the notoriety of a haunted house ended up influencing an actual sales dispute, making the famous Amityville house and the case of Stambovsky versus Ackley unavoidable references whenever stigmatized properties are discussed. Dogs get sprayed by skunks very often because skunks raise their tails as a warning, but dogs see this as an invitation to come smell my butt, which is exactly the opposite of the message the skunk is trying to send. On top of that, skunks almost always try to avoid using their spray because it takes several days to fully replenish it. So they first resort to very visible signals: stomping, arching their backs, huffing, and only then taking aim. The problem is that many dogs, especially young ones, interpret that whole sequence as part of a game or a normal encounter between curious animals. And by the time they understand the mistake, it is already too late. The Romans were known to create tombs for their dogs and give them epitaphs to remember them. One such inscription said, "I am in tears as I carry you to your final resting place, just as I rejoiced when I brought you home with my own hands 15 years ago." A man named Dale Schroeder used his entire life savings to send 33 students to college. He grew up poor in Iowa, never married, had no children, worked as a carpenter at the same company for 67 years, and owned only 2 pairs of jeans. Berlin still has not regained its pre-World War II population. In 1939, the city had around 4.5 million inhabitants, a figure that collapsed after the war because of bombings, deaths, the flight of civilians, and the city's later division. Although Berlin grew again over the decades, it remained below that historic peak for a long time. The comparison is not only demographic either. The war also erased entire neighborhoods, altered the city's social makeup, and left an urban mark that can still be felt in its layout, architecture, and historical memory. Judith Love Cohen, who helped create the abort guidance system that saved the Apollo 13 astronauts, went to work on the day she was in labor. She brought a printout of the problem she was working on to the hospital. She called her boss and told him she had solved the problem, and then she gave birth to Jack Black. E equals mc squared is not Einstein's full equation, but a special case that applies only when an object is at rest. The more general relationship between energy and momentum is that E squared equals m squared c to the 4th plus p squared c squared, where p represents the object's linear momentum. A silent man in the United Kingdom is repeatedly arrested for standing in certain streets and blocking traffic. He never says a word, not even in court or to his own lawyer. Every time he is released, he repeats the offense and remains completely silent. Researchers at Rice University have been using dead spiders to pioneer a new field of robotics called necrobotics. In their experiments, they used the spider's own hydraulic leg mechanism to turn the body into a kind of natural gripper. By injecting air with a needle, the legs extended and could open to grasp small objects. The team managed to lift lightweight components and even other spiders, and one advantage is that these grippers are already built by evolution, are biodegradable, and do not require manufacturing microclaws from scratch, which makes the idea especially striking for delicate tasks on a very small scale. In Forrest Gump, when the microphone gets cut off at the rally, What he is actually saying but cannot be heard is that sometimes when people go to Vietnam, they go home to their mamas without any legs. Sometimes they do not go home at all. And that is a bad thing. That is all he has to say about that. Before his career took off, Patrick Swayze and his wife ran a carpentry business. Although Swayze did not know much about carpentry at first, he learned a great deal from books, and the business ended up being very profitable. At one point, they even renovated actress Jaclyn Smith's kitchen. A woman who had successfully undergone a lung transplant went into anaphylactic shock after eating peanut butter. Before her transplant, she had never had any problem eating peanuts. She later learned that the 12-year-old donor of the lungs had a peanut allergy and had died from anaphylactic shock. The case drew so much attention because it suggested that, in rare circumstances, a food allergy could travel with a transplanted organ. Other similar cases were later published, and doctors began watching donors' allergy histories more closely, especially in lung and liver transplants, because the risk does not seem common, but it is serious enough to have changed medical recommendations. Although many animals run faster than humans, the strength and position of our glutes gave human beings the endurance to keep running and chasing prey when animals had to stop completely. The gluteus maximus helps stabilize the torso and maintain stride during long-distance running, but it was not working alone. The Achilles tendon, the neck ligaments that stabilize the head, the ability to sweat for cooling, and long, highly efficient legs were also key. The idea is that humans did not win through pure speed, but through wear and tear, following an animal for hours until heat and exhaustion forced it to stop. Jim Carrey was the first actor to have 3 movies go straight to #1 in the same year. The year was 1994, and the movies were The Mask, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, and Dumb and Dumber. It was a very good year. Disney waited until 2015 to ban the depiction of smoking in any of its movies. There had already been partial restrictions before that, but in 2015, Bob Iger expanded the policy to cover Disney, Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm films aimed at younger audiences, leaving only exceptions such as historical figures or scenes where smoking was shown in a negative way. What is interesting is that the change did not affect only classically Disney characters. It also reached massive franchises like Star Wars and Marvel, so the decision ended up influencing a large portion of family-oriented commercial cinema in the following decade. The sayings, "ignorance is bliss," "the end justifies the means," and "honor among thieves" are attributed to a Roman slave named Publilius Cyrus. What makes that especially striking is that he was not a formal philosopher, but a writer of mimes and short moral sayings who became so famous in Rome for his wit that he was freed and turned into a celebrated public figure. His lines survived in collections of moral maxims, and over the centuries many were translated, reshaped, or shortened, so some modern versions sound harsher and more absolute than the original Latin. Americans did not brush their teeth regularly until after World War II. Many soldiers were required to maintain strict dental hygiene as part of military routine, and when they returned home, that habit helped normalize daily brushing in millions of households. It also coincided with a key moment for modern dentistry. Public health campaigns expanded, commercial toothpaste became widespread, and the idea that keeping your teeth for life was a realistic goal, not a rarity, began to take hold. Before that, losing teeth at a relatively young age was far more common than it seems today. In 1985, a man programmed his computer to call Jerry Falwell's toll-free prayer line every 30 seconds for 8 months. This jammed the lines and cost them more than $750,000 in collect call charges. Willie, a parrot, alerted his owner Megan Howard when a little girl she was babysitting began to choke. Megan was in the bathroom, and the parrot started screaming, "Mama, baby!" while flapping his wings as the child turned blue. Megan ran over and performed the Heimlich maneuver, saving the girl's life. Marcus Licinius Crassus, often called the richest man in Rome during the time of Julius Caesar, created the first Roman fire brigade. However, the brigade would not put out a fire until the owner agreed to sell the property to him for a miserable price. In 1940, the 100 most popular boy names in the United States were used to name 74% of all baby boys born, while the 100 most popular names in 2021 were used for only 36%. In fact, 250 boy names were used to name 86% of all babies born in 1940. Today, the 250 most popular boy names account for only 55%. Harper Lee's friends gave her a full year's salary for Christmas in 1956 so she could take a year off work to write. Lee used that time to write To Kill a Mockingbird, which has since sold more than 30 million copies. There was a rumor that Stephen Hawking deliberately ran over the toes of people he did not like. He denied the rumor by saying it was a malicious rumor and that he would run over anyone who repeated it. The IRS cannot process individual checks, including cashier's checks, for more than $100 million. This is not a limit set by the IRS itself, but rather because Federal Reserve banks cannot handle checks in the automated system with that many digits due to 10-digit limits in automated check processing equipment and field designations. However, there is a provision for one-time exceptions, such as lottery winnings. Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak has a disdain for money as well as for accumulating great wealth. In 2017, he said that he did not want to be around money because it would corrupt his values. When Apple went public, Wozniak offered $10 million of his stock to Apple's earliest employees, something Jobs refused to do. Michael Jordan once gave a waitress a $5 chip as a tip for bringing him a drink. Wayne Gretzky stopped the waitress, took the $5 chip away, grabbed one of the many $100 chips that were sitting on Jordan's side of the table, and gave it to her. Then he said, "That's how we tip in Las Vegas, Michael." Some farmers in Bangladesh have switched from raising chickens to raising ducks because during catastrophic floods, ducks float. But the advantage is not just that they survive water better. Ducks can also feed in flooded fields, eat snails and insects in submerged areas, and keep producing eggs under conditions where chickens would do much worse. In a country where monsoon flooding regularly destroys crops and coops, that shift has become, for some families, a fairly practical way to adapt the farm to the climate instead of losing everything every season. Only about 20% of homes in the United Kingdom are fully detached with no shared walls, while about 85% of homes in the United States are detached. Pink Floyd's album The Wall hints at being an endless loop. The final song, Outside the Wall, ends with the words, "Isn't this where?" and the album begins with the words, "We came in," along with the continuation of the melody from the last song, suggesting the cyclical nature of the work's theme. Hundreds of mummified seals have been found as far as 41 miles inland in Antarctica. One analyzed specimen had been exposed to the elements for 15 years. Researchers theorize that between 1 and 2 seals get lost each year during snowstorms and accidentally travel inland, where they eventually die. In 1982, 28-year-old Vladimir Smirnov was ranked #1 in the world in fencing, but he died at the World Fencing Championships when a broken foil pierced his mask, entered through his eye socket, and penetrated his frontal lobe. The incident was in fact the reason fencing uniforms now include Kevlar as a standard feature. In 2007, 2 Americans rediscovered pure Nacional cacao trees, which were thought to have been completely wiped out by disease in the early 20th century. The ancient Nacional variety had been cultivated for more than 5,000 years and is believed to produce the most exquisite and expensive chocolate in the world. The reason we picture Neanderthals as hunched over and degenerate is that the first skeleton that was found was arthritic. It was the so-called Old Man of La Chapelle, an elderly individual found in France in the early 20th century, with such severe arthritis that for years it helped cement the image of the Neanderthal as clumsy and half-stooped. Over time, new studies and other better-preserved skeletons made it clear that this caricature was far from reality. Neanderthals walked upright, were sturdy, muscular, and anatomically much more similar to us than people believed for decades. The Sun takes 225 million Earth years to complete one orbit around the center of the Milky Way. This is called a galactic year. Some modern estimates round it to about 230 million years instead, but the idea is the same. During a single galactic orbit, more years pass on Earth than the span separating the first dinosaurs from the present day. In fact, the Sun has probably completed only about 20 or 22 orbits since it was born. So in the entire history of the solar system, it has gone around the galaxy only a handful of times. In 1959, a white man from Texas disguised himself as a black man and spent 6 weeks riding Greyhound buses. After publishing his experiences with racism, he was forced to move to Mexico for several years because of death threats. King Philippe VI of Spain is the poorest monarch in Europe after deciding to reveal the full state of his finances and declaring a net worth of 2.57 million euros. He owns no properties or land, and his wealth comes from jewelry and antiques. By comparison, his net worth was 5% of Queen Elizabeth's at the time. Lake Superior has an island that has a lake that has an island that has a pond that has a rock that, when the pond floods, becomes the largest island in the largest lake on the largest island in the largest lake on the largest island in the largest lake in the world. Five Guys deliberately puts extra fries in the bottom of the bag. They do it so customers think they are getting a good deal. However, the extra fries are already built into the menu price. Founder Jerry Morrell also says it is better for customers to feel like their order of fries was too large. Gingering is a practice that involves making an old horse look young and lively by inserting a piece of ginger into its anus, causing it to hold its tail high. In the 1890s, the United States government promoted the Alaska Reindeer Service with the idea of introducing reindeer herding among Alaska natives. To do this, reindeer were imported from Siberia, and Sami herders were brought in from Norway to teach herding techniques. Mike Judge moved to Texas, and a storm knocked down part of his fence. After his new neighbors fixed it without asking any questions, it became the basis for King of the Hill. The show is about neighbors who ultimately do the right thing for people and are basically good people. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer's red nose is trademarked, which is why it is not seen in the introduction to The Nightmare Before Christmas, Elf, and other Christmas movies. Rudolph remains a character protected by copyright and trademark, and for years, his most recognizable image has been tied to very specific licensing. That is why many Christmas productions prefer to use generic reindeer or make visual tributes without fully copying his most identifiable features. In the case of Elf, for example, the movie is full of nods to the style of the Rankin Bass specials, but it avoids turning Rudolph into a direct appearance with his glowing red nose as if he were an officially included character. After being scolded by a woman who felt his shoes were too expensive for children, Shaq walked away from a $40 million deal with Reebok and signed with Walmart instead. He then brought in Reebok designers so his Walmart shoes could look more expensive than their $20 price tag. More than 400 million pairs were sold. Better Call Saul was nominated for 53 Primetime Emmy Awards, without winning a single one. In doing so, it set the record for the most nominated series in Primetime Emmy history without ever taking home a win, something that was sealed after the January 2024 ceremony. What makes it especially striking is that it was not a show the Academy ignored completely. It was recognized again and again in major categories such as drama, acting, and writing, but always ended up falling just short. That combination of critical prestige, consistency, and zero wins is part of what made its Emmy bad luck so widely discussed. When Winston Churchill sold Chartwell, the family home, to the National Trust, he required that there always be an orange cat named Jock living there in comfortable residence. The organization honored that request, and the current resident is Jock the Seventh, a 6-month-old rescue kitten. The 5 oldest continuously operating companies in the world are all located in Japan. Among them, names such as Kongo Gumi, Nishiyama Onsen Keiyunkan, Sennen no Yu Koman, Hoshi Ryokan, and Genda Shigyo are often mentioned, businesses tied to traditional construction, hospitality, and ceremonial goods. What is remarkable is that several of them have passed through dozens of family generations without losing their main line of business. In Japan, there is even a term, shinise, for companies with extremely long histories, an idea closely tied to the prestige of maintaining reputation, craftsmanship, and clientele for centuries. Shia LaBeouf was heavily criticized for plagiarizing his directorial debut back in 2012. When he publicly apologized to the original artist, Dan Close, people discovered that Shia's apology itself had been plagiarized word for word from a 2010 Yahoo Answers post. Whales are colorblind and see the world only in black and white. In several species of cetaceans, scientists have found losses or mutations in genes related to certain visual pigments, suggesting very limited color vision, and in some cases, probably monochromatic vision. It makes sense when you think about the environment. As you go deeper into the ocean, many colors disappear quickly, and what matters more is detecting contrast, movement, and dim light. That is why a whale's eyesight is not designed for a world full of bright colors, but for navigating a bluish-gray environment where depth and low light completely change the rules. Grand Theft Auto V cost $265 million, the largest budget for any video game at the time, but it turned around and made $1 billion in the first 72 hours after release. Los Angeles was the first city in the United States to successfully embrace sushi in 1966. A man named Noritoshi Kanai and his Jewish business partner, Harry Wolf, opened a restaurant in Little Tokyo. That place, Kawafuku, is often cited as the first sushi restaurant aimed at the American public and helped take sushi out of the exclusive circle of the Japanese community. At first, many customers were wary of raw fish, so the restaurant also served as a kind of cultural bridge. Decades later, Los Angeles would go on to play a key role in popularizing versions like the California roll and in spreading sushi across the country. An FBI whistleblower reported multiple problems in forensic cases. After years of the FBI trying to ruin him, his claims were investigated, and a report showed that forensic hair analysis was wrong or inaccurate 90% of the time. While worker ants live only about a year, queen ants can live up to 30 years. That difference is enormous compared with other insects, and it is due in part to the fact that the queen is protected inside the nest, is not exposed to the same risks, and has a body specialized almost entirely for reproduction. In some species, a single queen can spend years producing thousands or even millions of offspring, while the workers keep renewing the colony. There are also documented cases of queens storing sperm from a single nuptial flight and using it for much of their lives, which allows them to keep laying eggs for decades without mating again. GoldenEye 007's multiplayer mode was such a last-minute addition that neither Rare management nor Nintendo management knew about it. The first time executives saw any of it was when the programmers were already playing it. Somerset Bridge in Bermuda is the smallest drawbridge in the world, measuring just 22 inches wide. It takes 2 seconds to cross it. In the 1950s, donut shops were the first food businesses commonly open late into the night. They became key spots for police officers working the night shift because they gave them a place to grab a snack, fill out paperwork, or simply take a break. That is why donuts became associated with the police. In 2014, planning permission was granted to convert an unused Victorian building in London's East End into a museum of women's history. However, local residents were shocked the following year when the museum opened instead as the Jack the Ripper Museum, sparking numerous protests. In 1967, Paul McCartney forgot his passport while traveling to France to film a music video. He told the agents that they knew who he was, so there was no need to see a photograph and a passport, and they let him through. In 2005, baseball player John McDonald was traded from the Toronto Blue Jays to the Detroit Tigers for a player to be named later. In 2006, John McDonald was traded back to the Toronto Blue Jays as the player to be named later, which essentially meant that John McDonald was traded for himself. In 1936, a sewer worker accidentally discovered an old drain that ran directly into the gold vault of the Bank of England. He wrote letters to the bank's directors and requested a meeting inside the vault at whatever time they chose. He then appeared up through the floor to greet them. Pepsi and Coca-Cola have been involved in a cola war since the 1970s. It reached a peak during Super Bowl 53 in Atlanta, where Coca-Cola is headquartered, when Pepsi was one of the main sponsors and even ran a campaign with the slogan, "Hello Atlanta, thanks for hosting, we'll bring the drinks." While filming Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017, Michael Keaton would whisper the phrase, "I'm Batman," to Tom Holland during fight scenes. Holland said they had a fight in the movie and he would punch Keaton, then Keaton would turn around and say in a deep voice, "I'm Batman," and keep quoting Batman lines on set. The United States had more than 50,000 pay toilets in 1970, but by 1980, almost none were left. 4 teenagers formed the Committee to End Pay Toilets in America. Chicago became the first major city in the United States to completely ban pay toilets in March of 1973. A woman was sentenced to life in prison after her son's death was attributed to poisoning. Sometime later, she gave birth to a second child while in prison, and when the baby showed the same symptoms, it was discovered that the real cause was a rare inherited metabolic disorder, not poisoning. As a result, the woman was released. Actress Catherine O'Hara, whom you probably know best from Home Alone, has situs inversus, a rare condition in which the organs are mirrored from their usual left-to-right positions in humans. Wayne Gretzky is the only hockey player ever to score more than 200 points in a single season, and he did it a total of 4 times. His extraordinary success as a hockey player was immortalized by the fact that not only did his own team retire number 99, which was Gretzky's jersey number, but the entire league did as well. On 50 Cent's third album, titled Curtis, the song Man Down is censored, even on the explicit version of the record. Interscope Records executives felt that the song portrayed violence toward police officers and refused to let him release the track with the full lyrics. In ancient Rome, the plebeians would evacuate entire cities in acts of revolt called secessions of the plebs, leaving the elite behind in the cities to fend for themselves. It was not just a symbolic protest. By leaving, Rome suddenly lost a large share of its soldiers, artisans, merchants, and farmers, so the city was left paralyzed and far more vulnerable. The first major secession ended with the creation of the tribunes of the plebs, magistrates meant to defend commoners against abuses by the aristocracy, and over time, these walkouts helped force several key political concessions. The Cold War was partly triggered by an event in Ottawa, when a Soviet cipher clerk working at the Soviet embassy in Canada defected and exposed the Soviet spy network in Canada. This led Allied countries to discover Soviet spies and informants inside their own governments. Billy West, who voices Philip J. Fry on Futurama, among other characters, intentionally made Fry's voice close to his natural speaking voice. He did it as a form of job security because that would make him harder to replace. Hail cannons are supposedly used to prevent hail from forming. A hail cannon is a shock-wave generator that is claimed to disrupt the formation of hailstones in the atmosphere. Japan's bullet train system is equipped with a network of sensitive seismometers. On March 11, 2011, one of the seismometers detected a magnitude 8.9 earthquake 12 seconds before it struck and sent a stop signal to 33 trains. As a result, only one bullet train derailed that day. Before making A Beautiful Mind, Ron Howard developed a different film about a man overcoming schizophrenia. Laws of Madness was an inspirational movie about Michael Lauder, a Yale Law School graduate living with schizophrenia, but the film was canceled when Lauder murdered his girlfriend. After the massive success of his #1 hit, Somebody That I Used to Know, Gautier stopped recording solo music, returned to his old band, and has not released a song under the name Gautier since. The most expensive dinosaur specimen and fossil ever sold is a Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton known as Stan, which sold at auction for $31.8 million in October of 2020. It is 70% complete and is the fifth most complete Tyrannosaurus rex fossil ever discovered. Rome has great difficulty expanding the city's subway system because excavation crews keep uncovering major archaeological finds. The expansion of Metro Line C has been underway for the past 40 years and has unearthed Hadrian's Athenaeum, a military complex, and an amphitheater. In 2018, engineers at the New Jersey Department of Transportation had to reverse engineer a steel bridge for a rehabilitation project. They had to do this because the files containing the original blueprints were destroyed in the collapse of the World Trade Center on September 11th. A homeless man once found a $10,000 check in the street that was meant for a real estate broker, and he found a way to return it. The broker was so moved that he gave the man a place to live and arranged a job interview for him. A year later, he was on the board of one of the broker's foundations. The distance between each degree of latitude on Earth is approximately 69 miles. The exact figure varies slightly because Earth is not a perfect sphere, but an oblate spheroid. That regularity is one of the reasons latitude has been so useful for navigation and cartography for centuries. Unlike longitude, whose spacing changes greatly depending on latitude, parallels maintain a fairly constant distance from one another from north to south. Garden veggie straws, which show fresh vegetables on the bag and are marketed as a healthy alternative to potato chips, are actually made from salt, starch, and tomato paste. In fact, they have less nutrition than real potato chips, and the manufacturer, which has a history of false claims, is now being sued. The Rockefeller Center tree has been donated to Habitat for Humanity every year since 2007 to help build a home. When the Christmas season ends, the enormous spruce is removed from the plaza, milled into beams and boards, and then that wood is delivered for the organization's housing projects. It is one of those little-known traditions that extends the life of the tree beyond December. Instead of ending as a dismantled decoration, it becomes a real part of a house, usually with a plaque remembering where that wood came from. In Japan, if a workday falls between two official holidays, that workday becomes an extra holiday by law, also known as Citizens' Day. The rule has existed since the National Holidays Act and is one of the reasons Golden Week can become even longer when the dates line up. It also combines with another very practical Japanese rule. If a holiday falls on a Sunday, a day off is usually moved to the following Monday. So in some years, the calendar ends up handing people surprisingly long vacation blocks without their having to request nearly as many days off. People with blue eyes are more prone to alcoholism. A study by researchers at the University of Vermont found a statistical association between light-colored eyes, especially blue ones, and a higher likelihood of alcohol dependence in people of European ancestry. The authors suggested that the relationship may be due to genes inherited together rather than eye color itself. When Mr. Rogers learned that his limousine driver would be waiting outside while he was in a meeting, he asked the driver to come inside. On the way back, they passed the driver's house, and Rogers asked if he could stop in to meet his family. Rogers stayed in touch with the driver for the rest of his life. The oldest source that established December 25th as Christmas Day was based on the assumption that the conception of Jesus Christ took place on the spring equinox, or March 25th, so his birth had to occur 9 months later, on December 25th. India requires polling stations to be located within 1.2 miles of every registered voter. This means some election workers walk for days through mountains and jungles to reach tiny remote villages, sometimes for a single registered voter. In several elections, polling stations set up for just one person in isolated parts of Gujarat, Arunachal Pradesh, or the forests of central India have become famous because the rule is not waived just because the trip is difficult. The operation is enormous. Millions of officials, voting machines, security personnel, and even mules, boats, or helicopters are mobilized so that the vote can reach literally every last corner. A Georgia teacher who bought a $400 travel insurance policy was rewarded with $10,000 because she read the fine print in the contract. After reading to page 7, she found a section saying that the first person to email and mention the fine prints contest would win $10,000. Lincoln Park originally wanted to call themselves Lincoln Park, with a C, but they ultimately changed their name so they could register the band's website with a K. Quebec banned toy and fast food ads aimed at children under 13, which led to a drop in childhood obesity rates. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company and tried to bribe members of Congress. Nearly 25% of those targeted accepted the bribe and were convicted. The photograph of Salvador Dali jumping and painting while water and live cats fly through the air took 5 hours and 26 attempts because they could not coordinate the exact moment. The floating objects hanging from wires were held out of frame. The frame of Dali's canvas was empty in the photo, and he painted it later. The Catholic Church has accepted Darwinian evolution as compatible with Christianity since 1950. That year, Pope Pius XII formally opened the door to discussion of the evolution of the human body in the encyclical Humani Generis, while still maintaining that the soul should be understood as a direct creation of God. Decades later, John Paul II went further by saying that evolution was more than just a hypothesis, so the modern Catholic position does not see an inevitable clash between evolutionary biology and faith, as long as the human being is not reduced to pure matter. Steve Glue was a smuggler who made millions smuggling Pez dispensers. This is because collectors are willing to pay very high prices for rare Pez, and a single shipment ended up being worth more than $500,000. He made $4.5 million over 11 years, and a documentary was made about him called The Pez Outlaw. In 1998, Sony had the chance to buy the rights to nearly all Marvel characters for just $25 million. They chose to buy only the rights to Spider-Man for just $7 million, claiming that nobody cared about Marvel's other characters. You can pay to bathe in radioactive water in Japan. Radium Onsen is one of the oldest bathhouses in Osaka, dating back to 1952, and it offers low radioactivity baths to visitors. This has long been seen by many people in the country as something healthy. A year's supply of bottled water for one person drinking 8 glasses a day would cost about $200. The same amount of tap water would cost only about 33 cents. The grasshopper mouse hunts scorpions and howls at the moon. This small desert rodent does not feed mainly on seeds like other mice, but acts more like a predator. It hunts insects, centipedes, small lizards, and even scorpions, which it can attack quite aggressively. Its famous howl is actually a high-pitched squeak that it makes with its snout raised to mark territory. a behavior that has earned it a reputation as a miniature wolf. It also has some resistance to the venom of certain scorpions, giving it an advantage over prey that would be a serious problem for other animals. The Mythbusters once tested a combination of common materials that created an extremely powerful explosive, but they erased the tapes and swore never to reveal the information. They then contacted DARPA and warned them about the possibility of the combinations being misused. Driving certain vehicles on certain days in the Philippines is prohibited, depending on the last digit of the license plate, which determines which day that car is not allowed to drive on public roads. When Queen Elizabeth visited the Game of Thrones set, she refused to sit on the Iron Throne because there is a rule that forbids her from sitting on a foreign throne. Narcan can block catnip's intoxicating effect in cats. The idea behind that is that the response to catnip does not seem to depend only on the smell of the plant, but also on brain circuits related to pleasure and reward. In older experiments, naloxone, the drug known for reversing opioid overdoses, was able to reduce or alter some of those behaviors in cats exposed to catnip. Nirvana played a concert in Buenos Aires where the crowd threw mud and trash at the women's band that opened the show. Kurt Cobain was so angry that he sabotaged the concert by mostly playing lesser-known songs and teasing Smells Like Teen Spirit without ever actually playing it. A bear was the first living being to survive a supersonic ejection in 1963. It was tested in the Convair B-58 Hustler aircraft, and the bear survived. Gargoyles on buildings were used to carry water away from the roof by spouting it through their mouths. The word is related to gargle. In fact, a gargoyle in the strict sense is not just any stone monster on a cathedral, but specifically a carved water spout. If the decorative figure does not channel water, it is technically usually called a grotesque rather than a gargoyle. The connection to gargle comes from the French word gargouille, and from Latin and Greek roots associated with the sound of the throat or bubbling water. So the name refers both to the sculpture's mouth and to the sound of the water as it comes out. In 1912, Teddy Roosevelt was shot on his way to his presidential campaign event. Instead of seeking medical attention, he continued on to give his speech, beginning by saying, "Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I do not know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot." When former Tonight Show host Johnny Carson died in 2005, Late Show host David Letterman delivered a comic monologue at the start of the program, later revealing that every joke had been written by Carson, who had been sending him 1 or 2 jokes a week during retirement. Many doctors have stopped calling cancer treatment a fight or a battle. They argue that these terms misrepresent how treatment actually works, in that, if the treatment fails, the patient is left with a sense of guilt and the false belief that they did not fight hard enough. Since 1843, the United States Treasury has maintained an account for donating directly to the government. It still exists today under the name Gifts to Reduce the Public Debt, and it allows people to send money or certain assets to reduce the debt held by the public, although in practice it brings in tiny amounts compared with the actual size of the federal debt. That is exactly why the account became a famous curiosity. It shows up in the news from time to time when some patriotic citizen leaves a donation, but its economic effect is almost purely symbolic. Able Archer 83 was a war exercise carried out by NATO in 1983 that caused panic among the Soviets by making them think they were actually being attacked, and as a result, they nearly launched a nuclear retaliation in response. It is now considered the moment when humanity came closest to nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Third man syndrome is an invisible presence reported by mountaineers and explorers during traumatic survival situations that talks to the victim, gives practical advice, and offers encouragement. The name became popular through the accounts of explorers such as Ernest Shackleton and through testimonies from climbers, castaways, and disaster survivors who described this companion as a calm, almost always reassuring figure. It is not considered a formal medical syndrome, but rather an extreme phenomenon of the mind under stress, exhaustion, hunger, cold, or isolation. And what makes it so striking is that many survivors insisted the presence did not feel like a chaotic hallucination, but like a real someone helping them stay alive. Hundreds of love letters were found between 2 World War II soldiers, and they are being turned into a book. In one of them, one wrote that it would be wonderful if one day their letters could be published in a more open time, so that everyone could see how much they loved each other. A school principal once made a student who had gotten into trouble sit in the basement and read the United States Constitution as punishment. That student, who memorized the Constitution as a result, was Thurgood Marshall, who went on to become the first black justice on the Supreme Court. During the American Revolution, an enslaved man was charged with treason and sentenced to hang. He argued that, as a slave, he was not a citizen and could not commit treason against a government to which he owed no allegiance. He was later pardoned. Shorts were once considered taboo in the United States. The town of Honesdale, Pennsylvania, banned the wearing of shorts in 1938. They said, "Honesdale is a modest town, not a bathing beach." Then, in May of 1959, Plattsburgh, New York, banned the wearing of shorts by anyone over the age of 16. Violators faced a $25 fine or 25 days in jail. There is an island in New York called Just Room Enough Island, where there is just enough space for one tree and one house. For years, it was also known as Hub Island, and it is part of the Thousand Islands archipelago in the St. Lawrence River, very close to the Canadian border. Its fame exploded precisely because of how absurdly small it is. It measures just enough to fit a tiny cottage, a tree, and a narrow strip of rock. After studios refused to make it, Monty Python and the Holy Grail was financed by rock stars Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Genesis, Jethro Tull, and Elton John, who saw it simply as a good tax write-off. Kate Winslet keeps her Oscar in the bathroom so her guests can hold it and give acceptance speeches in the mirror without feeling self-conscious. A 13-year-old boy opened a hot dog stand in front of his house in Minnesota, which led to a complaint being filed with the health department. Instead of shutting him down, inspectors helped him bring the stand into compliance with the code and even paid the $87 permit fee out of their own pockets. Jan Palach was a student at Charles University in Prague who, in January 1969, carried out an extreme act of protest after the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. After him, 26 other similar protests took place, and over time, Jan became a symbol of Czech freedom and, eventually, a national hero after the Velvet Revolution. After noticing a decline in the Christmas Island pipistrelle, a type of bat, the Australian government was given permission to capture and breed wild specimens. In August of 2009, scientists found only one bat through echolocation after 4 weeks, and it later fell silent that same month. Farmers in the United States are hacking their John Deere tractors with a Ukrainian software program, which seems to be the only way to truly own the machines and their computer systems. Otherwise, instead of owning them outright, they are effectively forced to rent them for life from John Deere, since the company can place locks on the tractor. Syndrome K was a fake disease invented by Italian doctors to save Jews who had fled to their hospital seeking protection during World War II. Patients with Syndrome K were quarantined, and the Germans were told it was a deadly, disfiguring, and highly contagious disease. They saved at least 20 lives. Wind chill refers to a real physical difference in how quickly the body loses heat, rather than to how temperature is perceived psychologically. Wind strips away the thin layer of warm air the body keeps next to the skin and speeds up heat loss, which is why the same temperature can become much more dangerous if the wind is strong. In fact, wind chill is used to estimate the risk of frostbite and hypothermia, not just to describe discomfort, and it does not even apply to inanimate objects in the same way it applies to a person. There was a 12-megaton explosion over the Tunguska River in Russia on June 30, 1908. It was caused by the airburst of a meteor about 5 miles above Earth and traveling at around 60,000 miles per hour. It knocked down an estimated 80 million trees across 830 square miles of forest. It was the largest impact event on Earth in recorded history, although much larger impacts occurred in prehistoric times. After the world's largest beach cleanup at Mumbai's Versova Beach, olive ridley sea turtles returned to nest there for the first time in decades. The campaign was driven by thousands of volunteers and removed millions of pounds of trash from a shoreline that had been covered in plastic, debris, and waste washed in by the sea. When the first nests began to appear, the discovery became a symbol of environmental recovery in the middle of a city. Because Versova is not a remote beach, but a densely populated urban strip where for years it had seemed impossible for wildlife to return. The FBI has had trouble recruiting hackers because of the agency's hiring rule stating that an applicant must not have used marijuana during the previous 3 years. Modern birds descend from 4 distinct lineages that survived the asteroid impact. These are ostriches and their relatives, waterfowl, landfowl, and modern birds. Put more technically, those groups are usually summarized as paleognathes, anseriforms, galliforms, and neoaves. And from them came virtually all of today's bird diversity, from ducks to hummingbirds. One of the most repeated ideas is that the survivors were probably small, more ground-dwelling birds capable of feeding on seeds or other resilient food sources, which was exactly what was most useful in a world devastated by fires, darkness, and destroyed forests. There are only three single-letter .com domains: q.com, x.com, and z.com. They were registered before 1992 and were allowed to remain under grandfathered rights, but any corporation was prohibited from owning any of the other 23 single-letter domains. Fred Rogers proposed to his wife Joanne through a letter. When she received it, Joanne ran to a payphone to answer. She was so nervous that when Fred picked up, she was focused on the graffiti inside the phone booth and greeted him by blurting out a swear word. Fred laughed, and she accepted his proposal. The official Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament organized by Konami instituted a hygiene clause in its rulebook. This allows judges to penalize players with dirty clothes or terrible body odor by giving them a loss. Super Smash Bros. Tournaments have also started implementing similar rules. In 1954, Ernest Hemingway survived 2 plane crashes in 2 days. He was reported dead for almost 24 hours until he was seen walking out of the jungle carrying bananas and a bottle of gin. In the early 20th century, there was a sideshow act called Sadie the Unsmiling, whose whole appeal was that she never smiled. A theater offered $1,000 to anyone who could make her laugh, which drew major comedians and turned their failed attempts into a show of their own. Over time, different explanations circulated for her expressionless face, and one of the most repeated was that she suffered from facial paralysis that kept her from smiling. The CPR doll is modeled after a real person. Her name was L'Inconnue de la Seine, and she drowned in a river near Paris. She has come to be known as the most kissed face in the world. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is the wordiest show on television, with 176.2 words per minute, making the FX sitcom created by Rob McElhenney the hardest show to follow if you watch it with subtitles. Dave Grohl wrote and recorded an entire album by himself, singing and playing every instrument in the studio. He chose the name Foo Fighters to hide his identity. After a record label signed him, he needed to recruit members to perform the songs live, and that is how the Foo Fighters were created. Pine mouth is a potential consequence of eating pine nuts that leaves a metallic taste in your mouth, sometimes for weeks. The phenomenon usually appears 1 or 2 days after eating them, and although it is quite unpleasant, it generally goes away on its own without causing permanent harm. It is believed to be linked to certain species of pine nuts, especially some imported from Asia, rather than to an allergy or serious poisoning. The strangest part is that the bitter or metallic taste can intensify right when you eat other foods, even things as simple as bread, fruit, or coffee. Victor Lustig was a con artist who famously sold the Eiffel Tower twice in 1925 to scrap metal dealers. To pull it off, he posed as a French government official and gathered several scrap merchants at an elegant hotel in Paris, where he explained that the tower was too expensive to maintain and that the state planned to secretly dismantle it and sell it as metal. His great trick was not just the scam itself, but his perfect understanding of his victim's shame. The first buyer was so humiliated by being fooled that he never even reported the fraud, which allowed Lustig to try the same trick a second time. Since 2011, Chinese astronauts have officially been barred from visiting the International Space Station. The reason is usually summed up as the so-called Wolf Amendment, a restriction passed in the United States that limited bilateral cooperation between NASA and China over security and technological espionage concerns. In practice, that kept China out of the International Space Station program and pushed the country to develop its own station, Tiangong, instead of joining the large orbital project shared by the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. When Sharon was bedridden with cancer, Ozzy asked Robin Williams to visit her. He randomly jumped onto her bed and, apparently, her family went from crying to laughing so hard they were peeing themselves in a second. She loved it and went from giving up to getting chemotherapy the next day. After Vancouver hosted the 2010 Olympics, its Olympic Village turned into a ghost town, to the point that a sales campaign discounted the remaining units by as much as 50%. In 2011, the developer defaulted on its loan payments because of poor sales. Shortly after Bill Gates left to found Microsoft, A Harvard professor who had worked with him remembered that Gates had moved to Albuquerque to run a tiny company writing code for microprocessors, of all things. The professor remembered thinking that Gates was such a brilliant kid, and that it was a waste. King cobras are not even true cobras, despite their name. In fact, they're the longest venomous snakes in the world. Unlike the true cobras of the Naja genus, the king cobra belongs to its own genus, Ophiophagus, a name that literally means snake eater, because a large part of its diet consists of other snakes, including venomous ones. It can grow longer than 16 feet, and it also has a behavior that is extremely unusual among reptiles. The female builds a nest out of leaves and may guard the eggs until they are about to hatch, a behavior almost unheard of in snakes of that size. Bob Fletcher was a man who took care of the farms of 3 Japanese-American families while they were interned during World War II. By keeping their farms running and paying their taxes and mortgages, he made sure the families did not lose everything. Despite being only 2.4 miles, or nearly 4 kilometers apart, Big Diomede and Little Diomede, known as Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island, are 21 hours apart because the international date line runs between them. When theater producer David Merrick got bad reviews for his 1961 musical, he found 7 random New Yorkers with the exact same names as the 7 leading theater critics of the time. He had those ordinary citizens speak enthusiastically about the musical and then ran an ad featuring their praise and names. Cherries are dried with helicopters. In the 1980s, growers pioneered the use of helicopters to dry their cherries and discovered that they are the fastest and most effective way to save a crop after rain. When Robert Ballard, a professor of oceanography, announced a mission to find the Titanic, it was a cover story for a classified mission to search for lost nuclear submarines. They finished ahead of schedule, so the team used the extra time to look for the Titanic, and actually found it. The Roman consul Manius Aquilius was executed by Mithridates of Pontus in 88 BC by having molten gold poured down his throat. The CIA revealed a heart attack gun in 1975. It was a battery-powered pistol that fired a dart made of frozen water and shellfish toxin. Once inside the body, it would melt, leaving only a red mark where it had entered. The official cause of death would simply be a heart attack. Before people drank coffee, it was called bunk, and people washed their hands with it. In medical and perfumery texts from the medieval Arab world, it appears as a fragrant ingredient used to remove odors after eating, especially at a time when banquets were often eaten with the hands. It was sometimes mixed with spices like cloves, cinnamon, or cardamom, so it worked almost like a luxurious scented cleanser. Centuries later, when coffee began to be consumed widely in Yemen and other parts of the Near East, that older use faded into the background, although the idea of using ground coffee to neutralize odors still survives today. Max Planck was told by his professor not to go into physics because nearly everything had already been discovered. Planck said he did not want to discover anything, only to learn the fundamentals. He ended up laying the foundations of quantum theory and winning a Nobel Prize. After taking 2 arrows to the face at the Battle of Neville's Cross, King David of Scotland fled and tried to hide beneath a bridge. When he was finally spotted by the enemy, he managed to fight back and knocked 2 teeth out of his captor. In fact, he survived and lived another 25 years. Frank Zappa was a futurist who was excited about the possibility of holographic images, so much so that he recorded footage of himself in the early 1970s with the intention of it being used once the technology had advanced far enough. A Frank Zappa hologram tour was eventually created using that footage. When Greece won its independence in 1822, Athens had been reduced to a small town of 4,000 inhabitants that had fallen into irrelevance over the centuries. It was selected as the capital for historical and sentimental reasons. The city is now the largest in Greece, with more than 3 million inhabitants. Washington Redskins owner Dan Snyder once cut down trees along the Potomac River so he could see it from his house. The trees were located in a national park, and a park ranger who raised concerns about it was raided by United States Marshals. Keanu Reeves runs a private charitable foundation that helps fund cancer research in children's hospitals. In 2009, he told Ladies' Home Journal that he does not like putting his name on it and simply lets the foundation do what it does. The meteorite that struck Earth 66 million years ago created a tsunami at least 328 feet high. However, if it had struck deeper waters, it could have produced a tsunami 3 miles high. In 2007, Rockstar Games let fans call a number and complain about what they thought was wrong with America. The best calls were featured on a radio station in Grand Theft Auto 4. Darwin, Australia is the jaw fracture capital of the world, with 17 cases per 10,000 people. That reputation comes from surgeons at Royal Darwin Hospital, who have spent years pointing out an extraordinarily high rate of mandibular fractures for a city of its size. What is most striking is that a large share of those cases has been linked to assaults, many of them involving alcohol and late-night fights. Later studies on facial trauma in Darwin continue to describe an unusually high frequency of this type of injury, so it does not seem to have been just a local anecdote. Most of the people Christopher Walken interacted with as a child were not native English speakers, including his father. Walken credits his unique, halting way of speaking to hearing people pause while searching for the right English word. At least half of the world's oxygen is produced by the ocean, specifically by marine algae or phytoplankton that carry out photosynthesis, converting carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight into nourishment while releasing oxygen. Within that group, microscopic organisms such as diatoms, dinoflagellates, and cyanobacteria stand out, forming the base of many marine food chains. One of the most important is Prochlorococcus, a tiny bacterium so abundant that it ranks among the most influential photosynthetic organisms on the planet. Apes do not ask questions. While apes can learn sign language and communicate with it, they have never tried to learn new knowledge by asking humans or other apes. In the most cited experiments, they could answer questions, use signs such as where or what, and even request objects or actions, but they were not observed initiating questions to fill an information gap. Even so, several researchers qualify the idea that they do not understand other minds. Today, there are studies suggesting that great apes do grasp the intentions, perceptions, and even mistakes of others, even if their curiosity is not expressed in a human way. India has a vast and rich dinosaur fossil bed that remains largely unexplored. Hundreds of fossilized dinosaur nests have been found in India, and exploring them could expand our understanding of dinosaurs. Unfortunately, the country does not have a facility capable of carrying out the deep cleaning that the fossils require. Volvo released the patent for its 3-point seatbelt because it was more valuable as a free, life-saving tool than as something to profit from. The design was created by engineer Niels Bohlin and appeared in 1959 when Volvo decided to let other manufacturers use it instead of keeping it as an exclusive advantage. The move ended up becoming one of the most celebrated decisions in automotive history because that same basic system was eventually installed in virtually every modern car and is credited with saving more than 1 million lives. Following his childhood dream of becoming an astronaut, Jose Hernandez applied 12 times, year after year, to NASA's astronaut training program before finally being accepted in 2004 at the age of 42. His dream of going to space came true in 2009 when he spent 14 days as a crew member aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. A Harvard study showed that hiring a highly productive, toxic worker causes more damage to a company's finances than employing several less productive but cooperative workers. In that analysis, researchers tracked tens of thousands of employees in call centers and found that toxic behavior not only increased turnover and firings, but also absenteeism and internal complaints. They also found that a single problematic employee could push others to behave worse, while an exemplary worker tended to spread useful habits, although with a slower impact. Millennial dads spend 3 times more time with their children than the amount of time their father spent with them. In 1982, 43% of fathers admitted that they had never changed a diaper, whereas today, that number is down to about 3%. Michael Jackson gave Weird Al Yankovic permission to make Fat, a parody of Bad. Jackson allowed him to use the same set built for his own Bad video from the Moonwalker film format. Yankovic said Jackson's support helped him get approval from other artists who wanted to parody. Queen Victoria was raised under the Kensington system, a strict and elaborate set of rules designed to make the young princess isolated, weak, and dependent on her mother. However, this backfired, leading Victoria to resist her mother once she came of age. A very frugal librarian, the late Robert Morin, left millions from his lifetime savings to the University of New Hampshire, where he had worked as a librarian. The university then spent $1 million of that money on a scoreboard for the new football stadium. Robert Pattinson dealt with an obsessed fan who had been camping outside his apartment by inviting her out to dinner. He said he just complained about everything in his life, and she never came back. In 2006, a man in Portland, Oregon hired a hitman to kill his 51-year-old wife. However, his wife ended up killing the hitman with her bare hands. While she had her hands around his neck, she asked who had sent him and told him she would call an ambulance. In 2004, a group of Yale students pulled a prank on Harvard by posing as a Harvard prep team and handing out signs to more than 18,000 Harvard fans at a football game. The Harvard fans were told the signs would spell out "Go Harvard," when in fact, they spelled out "We suck." During the production of the movie Roadhouse in 1989, all of the actors did their own stunts. Actor Sam Elliott recalled that, as far as he knew, all of the actors did their own fight scenes. "I got the living hell beat out of me throughout the whole movie." 6 Georgia inmates who were part of a work crew saved a sheriff's deputy who collapsed unconscious. They could have taken his gun and escaped in the work truck, but instead, they used the deputy's phone to call 911. The sheriff's office gave the men a pizza party with homemade dessert and recommended that their sentences be reduced. Animal Planet's reality series River Monsters ended because star Jeremy Wade had essentially managed to catch all of Earth's exceptionally large freshwater species, leaving no content for the show. Planned obsolescence is illegal in France. In fact, it is a crime to intentionally shorten a product's lifespan in order to make customers replace it. In early 2018, French authorities used this law to investigate reports that Apple was deliberately slowing down older iPhones through software updates. Frank Sinatra died on the night of the Seinfeld finale, and his ambulance reached the hospital in record time because traffic was unusually light since everyone was watching the show. Dr. Donald Hopkins helped eradicate smallpox, and has also been one of the key figures in the fight against guinea worm disease. Under that campaign, human cases dropped from about 3.5 million a year in 1986 to just 10 reported cases worldwide in 2025, leaving the disease on the verge of eradication. In the 1790s, an Oxford student introduced the use of guano, or bird droppings, as fertilizer. He spread guano across the university lawn to spell out the word guano. The lawn was cleaned shortly afterward, but when spring came, the word guano was clearly visible, growing taller and thicker than the rest of the grass. When Nintendo saw a drop in revenue from the underperforming Wii U, its chief executive cut his own salary in half for 5 months instead of blaming the workers. A waitress was tipped with a lottery ticket and won $10 million. She later became caught up in a long chain of legal disputes and personal tragedies, including lawsuits over the prize, conflicts with the person who gave her the ticket, a violent episode involving her ex-husband, and a confrontation with the Internal Revenue Service. Nearly 75% of all the aluminum ever produced in history is still in use today because of recycling. That is possible because aluminum can be melted down and reused over and over again without losing its properties, which is uncommon for a mass-use material. On top of that, recycling it requires only a fraction of the energy needed to produce new aluminum from bauxite. So, old cans, car parts, window frames, or electrical cables have real value as scrap and are rarely treated as simple trash. Eminem watched his daughter Haley be crowned homecoming queen from an empty classroom at the school because he did not want to take attention away from her. The cast of Friends earned $1 million per episode in the final 2 seasons, and now make $20 million a year per cast member from reruns. The show still generates $1 billion a year for Warner Brothers, all thanks to David Schwimmer encouraging the cast to negotiate as a team. Most window glass is made by pouring molten glass onto a bed of molten tin, which produces glass with a uniform thickness and smooth surfaces as it cools. While filming the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, they were unable to get a permit to shoot one scene. They filmed it anyway, and the studio hired a stand-in to claim he was the director and spend a night in jail. Microsoft tested a 4-day workweek in Japan as part of a work-life choice challenge by closing the offices every Friday. Productivity, measured by sales per employee, increased by almost 40% compared with the same period the year before. General Motors recalled 800,000 cars in 2014 because of defective ignition switches. The cars would shut off while being driven, which meant drivers lost power steering and brakes, and the airbags would not deploy. They had known about the problem since 2005, but never fixed it because it would have been too expensive. 124 people died because of that decision. United Airlines had assured a blind woman that they would help her off the plane, but only after the other passengers had gotten off. That was before they forgot about her and shut the plane with her still inside after everyone else had left. When Rockstar first released Grand Theft Auto, they actually paid critics to criticize the game negatively in order to keep it controversial and, therefore, popular. They targeted right-wing newspapers to ensure moral outrage and push the game to success. CBS used to add bird calls to its golf broadcasts to get rid of awkward silences, until they were caught by someone watching from home who knew the calls belonged to birds that did not live in the region where the golf tournament was being played. DreamWorks used to punish animators who were falling behind on The Prince of Egypt by sending them to work on Shrek. The punishment even had a nickname: being Shreked. The founder of Hyundai was born into an impoverished farming family in what is now North Korea. In 1998, he sent 1,001 cattle to his hometown in North Korea as a repayment 1,000 times over for a cow he stole in the early 1930s, so he could afford a train ticket to Seoul and escape poverty. Eton College was founded in 1441 as a charity school that provided free education. It is now one of the most expensive schools in the United Kingdom. Tom Cruise divorced all three of his ex-wives when they turned 33. Mimi Rogers, Nicole Kidman, and Katie Holmes. Each of them was 11 years younger than the one before. Napoleon Bonaparte's grandnephew, Charles Joseph Bonaparte, founded the FBI. The speed camera lottery in Stockholm, Sweden is unique. If you drive at or below the speed limit, you are entered into a lottery where the prize pool comes from the fines paid by speeders. Because of this, the average speed dropped from about 20 miles per hour to about 15.5 miles per hour, a reduction of 22%. For 500 years, everyone who earned a bachelor's degree at Oxford had to swear eternal enmity toward a person named Harry Semionis. The university itself has no idea who he was or how this tradition began. Kenny G's song Going Home is a massive hit in China and is played at the end of television broadcasts and during the closing of shopping malls, food courts, and train stations to symbolize the end of activities and the close of the day. 8 years after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy avoided the public unveiling of his White House portraits, but the Nixons kindly arranged a private and secret visit for her and her children. It was her only return visit. Samuel L. Jackson heard someone reciting his Ezekiel 25:17 speech and turned around to discover it was Marlon Brando, who gave him his phone number. When Jackson called, a Chinese restaurant answered, but when he asked for Brando, Brando picked up. That was how Brando screened his calls. Iggy Azalea got her stage name from the game that tells you your porn star name, which uses the name of your first pet and the street you grew up on. In August of 2019, the City Council of Bielefeld, Germany, offered €1 million to anyone who could prove that their city did not exist, in an effort to counter a conspiracy theory claiming that the city was an illusion. Prince William and Prince Harry once pranked their grandmother, the Queen, by changing her voicemail greeting to say, "Hello, this is Liz. Sorry I'm away from the throne. For a direct line to Philip, press 1. For Charles, press 2. And for the Corgis, press 3. Kristen Harila and Tenjin Sherpa set a new speed record by summiting the 14 mountains taller than 8,000 meters, completing the feat in 92 days in 2023. The pair also set a record by reaching 26 8,000-meter summits in 1 year within a 3-month period. Only 48 people were rescued from the 212 incidents of people falling overboard on cruise ships between 2009 and 2019. That works out to only about 23% of the cases ending in a successful rescue. Some people carry a gene called ABCC11, or the no-body odor gene. It causes odorless underarm sweat and dry earwax. The best-known version of that gene is especially common in East Asian populations and changes the activity of the apocrine glands, which are the ones most closely linked to underarm body odor. So the effect is not that the person does not sweat, but that the sweat provides much less material for bacteria to produce that strong, characteristic smell. The same genetic change is also associated with a lower likelihood of needing deodorant compared with people who carry the other version of the gene. The belly button is so dirty that scientists are finding new and previously unknown bacteria there. One person had bacteria that had previously been found only in Japanese soil, a place that person had never visited. The discovery came out of a citizen science project that sampled hundreds of belly buttons and found thousands of types of bacteria, with microbial communities so different from person to person that some belly buttons look like tiny, unique ecosystems. What is especially interesting is that most of them were not dangerous, but a normal part of the skin's flora. And many times, the real mystery was not why they were there, but how they had gotten there. A small town in Canada has celebrated Levy Day on January 2nd every year since 1959. It is a day when all businesses close so people can fight their hangovers for one extra day after New Year's Eve. While E.T. the Extraterrestrial was being made, Mars Incorporated, the company that owns M&M's, refused to give director Steven Spielberg permission to use the candy in the film. As a result, Spielberg used Reese's Pieces, and sales of Reese's Pieces rose by 85% after the movie's release in 1982. Ghostbusters actor Ernie Hudson, who played Winston Zeddemore, auditioned to be the voice of the same character in the animated series, and was turned down because they did not think he sounded enough like Winston from the movie. Carrie Fisher delivered a cow tongue inside a Tiffany jewelry box to a predatory producer who had assaulted her friend. She told him that the next delivery would be something of yours in a much smaller box. There is a family butcher shop in the city of Takasago in western Japan that sells Kobe beef croquettes, and they are so popular that there is a 30-year waiting list for them. Because earthquakes constantly destroyed the buildings built by the Spanish, such as churches, houses, and settlements in the colonial Philippines, a new architectural style was created specifically to withstand tremors, called earthquake baroque. In Germany, it is illegal to kill any vertebrate animal without a valid reason, such as the animal being sick or posing a danger to humans. Because of this, all German animal shelters are no-kill shelters. Canadian researchers watched 40 episodes of the Dr. Oz show and found that nearly 40% of all the medical advice was not based on evidence, and 15% directly contradicted the evidence. Ocracoke Island in North Carolina was the place where the pirate Blackbeard died in November of 1718. The battle took place in an inlet near the island, when men sent from Virginia surprised him on his sloop and fought him in a brutal close-range battle. According to the most famous accounts, Blackbeard took multiple gunshots and cuts before falling, and his head ended up hanging from the bowsprit of the victorious ship as proof that he had finally been brought down. In 1961, Lego created its own airport and airline just to transport its employees around the world. Today, the airport is the second largest in Denmark and is approximately the size of the airport in Anchorage, Alaska. Lyndon B. Johnson constantly asked the Air Force One flight crew to change the cabin temperature. Eventually, they installed a fake control knob so he could adjust the temperature himself. The president stopped complaining. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars between 1792 and 1815 cost Britain an estimated combined £1,650,000,000 to finance. Adjusted for inflation, that would equal approximately £43,302,000,000 today. Similar to UFOs, the United States Navy has a classification for unidentified submerged objects, or USOs. These are usually large, unidentified marine animals, and they have caused more damage to naval vessels than UFOs have to aircraft. The lunar temperature was 93 degrees Celsius, or 200 degrees Fahrenheit, at the Apollo 11 landing site. And that was not air temperature, because the moon has virtually no atmosphere. It refers to the temperature of the sunlit surface. That difference matters a lot, because just a few steps away from a sunny area, there could be shade that was dramatically colder. In fact, one of the challenges of Apollo 11 was operating in an environment where the ground, the module, and the suits could heat up or cool down extremely depending on sunlight, which made it necessary to plan the timing and length of the moonwalk very carefully. In 2012, a Burger King employee anonymously posted an image on the website 4chan showing himself putting his feet in the lettuce with the caption, "This is the lettuce you eat at Burger King." It took only 20 minutes for people to track down the branch where the employee worked and contact the news. He was fired immediately. The Eastern Front alone is enough to make World War II one of the deadliest wars, if not the deadliest war of all time. Of the roughly 40 million deaths caused by World War II, around 30 million occurred on the Eastern Front. Narcissistic athletes have been shown to perform better in high-stakes, highly competitive situations, and worse in low-stakes situations. By contrast, non-narcissistic athletes perform worse in high-stakes situations. You are less likely to die during an economic depression. This is mainly attributed to cleaner air, reduced traffic, and less money being spent on vices such as tobacco and alcohol. Conman Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can lied about most of the story. The book in which he recounted his crimes was the only successful scam he ever managed to pull off. In 2014, there was a battle involving 7,500 players in EVE Online, with thousands of ships destroyed and an estimated $300,000 in real-world money lost in the conflict. The story of Jesus' birth appears only in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and both give different accounts. Luke mentions the adoration of the shepherds, while Matthew mentions the arrival of the wise men, which leads to the massacre of the innocents. Rapid starvation happens when the body takes in too much protein with an insufficient amount of fat or carbohydrates. When excessive amounts are consumed, this can put the body at risk of elevated ammonia levels in the blood. Protein poisoning can be fatal because of those elevated levels. The first man to finish the 1904 Olympic marathon rode in a car for half the race. The actual winner had to be carried across the finish line after his trainers gave him a mixture of brandy and eggs. The fourth-place finisher stole 2 peaches from a spectator, ate rotten apples from an orchard, and then took a nap. It seems the Olympics have changed a little. Nas listed his then 7-year-old daughter, Destiny Jones, as an executive producer on his 5th studio album, Stillmatic, to make sure she would always receive royalty checks from that album. On September 11, 2001, Washington-based attorney Frank Razzano was staying at the World Trade Center Marriott, which was located at the base of the towers. He woke up when the first plane hit, but actually went back to bed. Then he got up, turned on the news, took a shower, packed his things, and only decided to evacuate when the South Tower collapsed onto the hotel. Kelly is a dolphin whose trainers gave her fish in exchange for bringing them trash and dead seagulls to help clean her pool. She started hiding fish under a rock in her pool and then used the fish to lure seagulls, which she brought to her trainers to get even more fish. She taught the same strategy to her calf, who then taught it to more dolphin calves. For the first time, the average American ate 100 pounds or more of chicken. The statistic became notable because for much of the 20th century, beef was the dominant meat in the United States, but chicken ultimately took over thanks to its lower price, mass production, and reputation as a lighter option. According to Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs never programmed for Apple. He did no original design work, and one of Apple's early employees has said that Wozniak was the inventor while Jobs was the marketing person. Eminem's song Lose Yourself was the first rap song to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song, but Eminem did not even watch the ceremony because he did not think he had a chance to win. Instead, he fell asleep while watching cartoons with his daughter. 50% of people who buy vinyl records in the United States do not actually own a record player to listen to them. The Roman Emperor Claudius wrote a book, now lost, about the art of playing dice. When Brendan Shanahan was 14, he asked star hockey player Rick Vaive for an autograph, but was rudely brushed off. 4 years later, Shanahan was in the NHL and fought and beat Vaive the first time they played against each other. In 2019, basketball player DJ Cooper was suspended for 2 years after using his girlfriend's urine to try to cheat on a drug test. The test revealed that he was pregnant. A family in Georgia claims to have inherited a song in an unknown language from the time of their enslavement. Scientists identified the song as an authentic West African funeral song in the Mende language that survived multiple mother-to-daughter transmissions over several centuries. English law, when discussing trademark infringement, uses the standard of the moron in a hurry. It was famously used in the case of Apple Corps versus Apple Computer, where it was ruled that even a moron in a hurry would not confuse the Beatles record label with Apple Computer. There used to be a period after the New York Times logo. After more than 100 years, they calculated that they could save $600 in ink by removing it. So they did. When Lawrence Anthony, known as the Elephant Whisperer, died, a herd of elephants arrived at his home in South Africa to mourn him. Although the elephants were not alerted to his death, they traveled to his house, stayed there for 2 days, and then dispersed. Jabba the Hutt was depicted as a yellow, walrus-looking man in Marvel's comic adaptation of A New Hope. This was before Disney bought both properties. The moon is about 1/400th the size of our sun, but it is also about 1/400th of the distance from Earth, which makes the moon and the sun appear the same size in the sky. This coincidence is why we get such spectacular total solar eclipses, although they do not always line up perfectly. Because the orbits of Earth and the moon are not exact circles, sometimes the moon appears a little larger and sometimes a little smaller, which creates annular eclipses. The moon is also slowly moving away from Earth, so this cosmic fit will not last forever. The famous Christmas song, Jingle Bells, was written by J.P. Morgan's uncle. In the later verses, the characters lose control of the sleigh, crash, get laughed at, and are then encouraged to pick up more girls and get faster horses. On top of that, it was not originally a Christmas song. Teddy Roosevelt was chosen as vice president because of his support for antitrust reform, and conservatives knew the vice presidency held little power. However, just 6 months into the term, President McKinley was assassinated and Roosevelt became president, marking the beginning of an unprecedented era of antitrust and labor reforms. Oliver Sipple was the man who stopped an assassination attempt against United States President Gerald Ford in 1975. However, the news also revealed that he was gay, and because of that, a major controversy followed, to the point that the president only wrote him a thank you note, and his family disowned him. Paper cuts hurt so much because, on a microscopic level, paper is actually fairly rough. A knife makes a clean cut, but paper acts more like a serrated blade and causes more damage to cells and nerve endings. Paper also leaves behind tiny fibers and chemical residue, which irritates the wound even more. Kentucky Fried Chicken once ran out of chicken in the United Kingdom. KFC began closing locations in response to the lack of its main ingredient, which meant that by February 18, 2018, only 266 of the 870 restaurants in the United Kingdom and Ireland were actually open. The Make-A-Wish Foundation granted a child a visit to the set of Thor Ragnarok. When Thor sees Hulk enter the arena on Sakaar, the child said Thor should say that he is a friend from work. Teflon, used in nonstick pans, was discovered by accident by a 27-year-old engineer at DuPont while researching refrigerants in 1938. The chemist was Roy Plunkett, and the discovery happened when he opened a cylinder of tetrafluoroethylene gas that appeared to be empty, even though the gas had actually polymerized inside, forming a slippery white substance. Before it ended up in kitchens, the material attracted attention for something else. It was extraordinarily resistant to heat and chemicals, so it was used in seals, valves, wiring, and even parts of the Manhattan Project long before it became famous for eggs that do not stick. The ancient Babylonians did math in base 60 instead of base 10. That is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. Their system was especially convenient for calculating fractions, because 60 can be divided by many whole numbers without leaving awkward remainders, such as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, or 15. That made it very useful for astronomy, timekeeping, and geometry, which is why a mathematical custom born thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia ended up surviving in clocks, maps, compasses, and trigonometry classes. It would take 18 months to walk the Great Wall of China, and that is assuming a very well-planned expedition, because not all of the wall is a continuous walkway, far from it. There are restored and tourist-friendly sections, but also stretches that have collapsed, become overgrown, or been lost in remote areas of northern China. In addition, the Great Wall that people often imagine as a single line is actually a system built by different dynasties over centuries, with parallel walls, detours, and fortresses. That is why a full crossing is more like an archaeological and endurance expedition than a simple long-distance hike. The creators of Parks and Recreation researched the show by interviewing real government officials. One said he was a libertarian, so he did not really believe in the mission of his job, fully aware of the irony. And that is how the character Ron Swanson was born. Clover used to be part of nearly every lawn because it was cheap and easy to maintain. After World War II, pesticide companies declared it a weed, and until recently, it had been removed from lawns. In a survey of more than 2,000 American adults commissioned by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, 64% reported using some type of substance, at least occasionally, to help them fall asleep or stay asleep. The Persian king, Aga Muhammad Khan, ordered the execution of 2 servants for being too noisy because it was a holy day. He postponed their execution by 1 day and forced the servants to return to their duties. They murdered the king while he slept that night. Hugh Jackman took a pay cut to make sure Logan would get an R rating. Since movies with that rating usually limit the total audience that can attend, Jackman's reduced salary lowered the budget to an acceptable point and helped justify the rating. The team behind Return of the Jedi mocked the design of Admiral Akbar because they thought the character looked too ugly. Director Richard Marquand refused to change it, saying he believed it was good to tell children that good people are not necessarily good-looking and bad people are not necessarily ugly. Apple Watch sales in 2020 reached approximately $30.6 billion, compared with exports from the entire Swiss watch market, which totaled about $16 billion. Researchers taught African gray parrots to buy food using tokens. They were paired up, and one parrot was given 10 tokens, while the other was given none. With no incentive to share, the parrots that had tokens started giving some to their partners who had none, so they could all eat. Tom Green's movie Freddy Got Fingered was nominated for 8 Golden Raspberry Awards and won 5. Tom Green attended the ceremony and brought his own red carpet with him. He then proceeded to play the harmonica badly for so long that he had to be dragged off the stage. An 86-year-old woman wrote an upbeat review for the local newspaper about a new Olive Garden. She was mercilessly mocked by the internet. Anthony Bourdain thought she had a valuable perspective on small-town food, so he published a book of her reviews. A researcher once played back a recording of an elephant that had died. The sound came from a speaker hidden in a bush. A family that heard it went wild, calling and searching everywhere. The dead elephant's daughter kept calling out for days afterward. The researchers who played the recording never did anything like that again. Marion Stokes was a woman from Philadelphia who started recording everything that aired on television back in 1979 and did not stop until her death in 2012. The 71,000 VHS and Betamax tapes she made are the most complete collection preserving this era of television. They are currently being digitized by the Internet Archive. Avril Lavigne recorded the chorus of the song Girlfriend in several different languages to appeal to foreign markets. It was recorded in Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Japanese, and Mandarin, in addition to a Hindi version that was ultimately scrapped. Carrie Fisher once told her fans that no matter how she went, she wanted it reported that she had drowned in moonlight, strangled by her own bra. In 2006, the film Blazing Saddles, the 1974 American satirical comedy, was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress. Since then, it has been preserved in the National Film Registry. Elvis Presley's manager sold badges with the phrase, "I hate Elvis," as a way to make money from people who were not buying Elvis merchandise. Jimmy Carter was the longest-lived president in United States history, the one who spent the most time in retirement after leaving the White House, and the first to live more than 40 years after his inauguration. He was also the first president of the United States to reach 100 years of age. Ham radio operators can speak directly with astronauts on the International Space Station. Low-power radio equipment and small antennas can be used to establish communications with the station. This mainly happens during their scheduled free time at night. Ethan Zuckerman, the man who invented pop-up ads, has apologized to the world for creating one of the most hated forms of advertising on the internet. When pimps are arrested, their cash can legally be confiscated, but not their jewelry. That is why pimps wear a lot of jewelry, so they can pawn it for bail money. Sierra Leone has had only one elected Muslim president since independence, despite being a Muslim-majority country. Gordon Ramsay set up a business inside a London prison that taught inmates how to bake and sold the products outside, providing financial support to the prison while also giving inmates job experience they could use to find honest work after serving their sentences. In World War II, the British, with the help of a professional magician, tricked the Germans into believing that a British double agent had successfully sabotaged an aircraft factory. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder does not always mean having a short attention span. Hyperfocusing on a task for hours at a time is also a known symptom of the disorder, where the inability to stop is considered the problem. Amelia Earhart had a co-pilot when she disappeared. His name was Fred Noonan. The Hawaiian island of Kauai encourages tourists to take a shelter dog out for the day as part of a dog field trip program. Getting the dogs out of the facility gives them exercise and increases their chances of being adopted by a local resident. Metallica's debut album, Kill 'Em All, was originally going to be titled Metal Up Your Ass, with cover art showing a hand holding a dagger emerging from a toilet. An American law firm planted traps on file-sharing sites such as the Pirate Bay and then sued the people who downloaded its files. The matter reached the FBI, and the pirate site agreed to cooperate with federal agents, which led to the corrupt lawyers going to prison. One of the 8 Hawaiian islands, Niihau, is known as the Forbidden Island. It is privately owned and cannot be visited without an invitation. 84 residents were living there according to the 2020 census, and they live in a primitive way, just as their ancestors did. The Irish flag is green, white, and orange because the green represents the Roman Catholics in the country, the orange represents the Protestants, and the white represents peace between them. Jim Carrey used to do live comedy in his 7th grade class. He used humor to fit in, and his teacher made a deal with him. If he stayed quiet all day, he would get 15 minutes at the end of class where he could do comedy using material from everyday life, from the classroom, or by doing impressions of staff members. Mario Puzo, the author of the Godfather books, who also adapted them for film, had no idea what he was doing because he had never written a screenplay before. After winning 2 Academy Awards, he decided to buy a book on screenwriting to learn how to do it. In the first chapter, it said he should study The Godfather Part 1. The world's largest collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia is in Equatorial Guinea, purchased by the son of the ruling dictator with stolen government funds. The Milky Way galaxy is being pulled toward a mysterious area in space called the Great Attractor. It is being dragged at about 600 kilometers per second. Whatever it is, we cannot see it from Earth because it is hidden behind the center of our galaxy. Angelina Jolie said that during a very difficult period in her life, she came close to considering an extreme way of dying because she thought it would be easier for her family. However, the person she spoke to asked her to wait for a while, and that pause ended up helping her step away from that decision. The reason the Michelin Man is white is that rubber tires are naturally white. It was not until 1912 that companies began mixing carbon-based chemicals into rubber to make black tires. This process is not just a cosmetic change, but a structural one, making the tire stronger and more durable. A high dose of radiation does not guarantee cancer. An exposure of around 1 sievert can cause a serious case of radiation sickness and require hospitalization, but the estimated risk of developing cancer from that dose would still be less than 5%. Even in extreme cases involving radioactive materials, the cancer risk is not always as high as many people imagine. Only 3 people in the United States were qualified to hand-pack the parachutes for Apollo 15. Their expertise was so vital that they were not allowed to travel together in the same car for fear that a single car accident could cripple the space program. The 5th season of Big Brother Germany lasted 365 days and had a total of 60 contestants competing for a grand prize of 1 million euros. This season also holds the Guinness World Record for the longest uninterrupted live television broadcast. According to one study, strict parents can turn their children into more effective liars because children who are afraid to tell the truth learn more deceptive behaviors to avoid getting into trouble. After Beethoven went deaf, he discovered that he could attach a metal rod to his piano and bite down on it while he played. This allowed him to hear perfectly through the vibrations in his jaw. The process is called bone conduction. After firefighters rescued some piglets from a barn fire, 6 months later, the farmer sent sausages made from those piglets as a thank you gift. Gary Gygax's wife was convinced he was having an affair, so she followed him to a dimly lit basement and walked into the room, only to find him and his friends hunched over hand-drawn maps. Gary would go on to invent the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. During the health crisis, several airlines offered flights to nowhere, where the plane took off and landed at the same airport. Ryan Stiles, the comedian from Whose Line Is It Anyway, has frequently raised money for children with burn injuries. Since 2009, he has raised more than $500,000 for the Burned Children Recovery Foundation, helping it recover from the financial crisis of 2008. The grandniece of the last emperor of China is an artist who opened a gallery in Vancouver's Chinatown, where she sells her paintings and displays works dedicated to explaining the Qing dynasty. If you publish a book in Norway, the government will buy 1,000 copies, or up to 1,500 if it is a children's book, and distribute them to libraries across the country. A Polish environmental charity placed a SIM card in the GPS tracker to follow the migration pattern of a white stork. They lost track of the stork and later received a phone bill for $2,700. It turned out that someone in Sudan had removed the SIM card from the tracker and made more than 20 hours of phone calls. There are 84 billionaires living in San Francisco, 112 in Hong Kong, and 136 in New York. Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Tom Hanks have regular colonoscopy parties. That is, when they do the prep together the night before and share a car ride to get their colonoscopies the next day. There is a convenience store hanging off a cliff in Hunan, and it has been called the most inconvenient convenience store in China. In 2023, National Geographic eliminated 17 editorial positions, including all of its staff writers and several veteran editors, including one who had spent nearly 40 years at the magazine. The cuts came even though the publication still had nearly 1,800,000 subscribers at the end of 2022. In 1825, painter Samuel Morse received a letter saying that his wife was ill. The next day, another letter said she was dead. 2 days later, he discovered that his wife had already been buried. Furious at the slowness of communication, he invented Morse code. Artist Tom Luther gave up the copyright to all of his music in 2022, making every song he wrote available for free download and use. About 1 in 8 people, or 12.3% of the population in the United States, live in the urban areas of New York City, Chicago, or Los Angeles. Those urban areas make up only 0.2% of the land area of the United States. While Dirty Dancing was being filmed in October of 1984, Virginia's cold weather caused temperatures to drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit during the lake scene. Jennifer Grey later described the water as horrifically cold and said she might not have gone into the lake if she had not been young and eager to work. FBI agent Robert Hansen was assigned to find a mole inside the FBI after the FBI's moles in the KGB were caught. It turned out that Robert Hansen was the mole, and he had been working with the KGB since 1979. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has never won an Emmy in its entire run. It has not even been nominated in a major category, with 3 nominations for Outstanding Stunt Coordination being the only nominations it has ever received. Christian minister Kenneth Copeland, who preaches prosperity theology, has a net worth of $750 million. The smallest body of water with a noticeable tide is Lake Superior. Even so, its actual tide is tiny, only a few inches, and is usually overwhelmed by much larger changes caused by wind, atmospheric pressure, and seiches, which are oscillations of water within the lake. That is why Lake Superior and the other Great Lakes are generally classified in practice as non-tidal bodies of water, even though they technically do feel a small gravitational pull from the moon and the sun. A marketing company in Japan called Piala gives employees who do not smoke 6 extra vacation days to make up for smoking breaks. The company found that the new policy gave many employees the push they needed to quit smoking. Not everyone has an inner voice. The condition of strongly hearing your own breathing, voice, and bodily functions is called eustachian tube dysfunction. A 22-year-old Canadian named John McHugh took it upon himself to fill potholes with a sign that said, "I fixed your potholes. Pay me instead of your taxes." Drivers gave him cash, coffee, and cigarettes for filling potholes. A group of undercover Detroit police officers posing as drug dealers tried to arrest another group of undercover police officers posing as drug buyers in 2017. Dennis Ritchie, who invented the C programming language and co-created the Unix operating system, and who is largely credited with influencing effectively every software system we use every day, died 1 week after Steve Jobs. Because of this, his death was largely overshadowed and ignored. Modern Africa is associated with large animals such as elephants, lions, and rhinos, but large mammals once had a global distribution until a mass extinction about 11,700 years ago, and Africa is simply the one continent that managed to keep a large number of them. Franklin D. Roosevelt investigated the mystery of Oak Island until his death, a trove of lost treasures in Canada that has been rumored about for centuries. The Money Pit was said to contain artifacts from the Knights Templar, or Captain Kidd. There have been several investors over the years, including John Wayne. The term military grade is just a marketing strategy. In the actual military grade means meeting the minimum durability requirements while also being as cheap as possible. The Cabbage Patch Kids War of 1983 was a phenomenon in which parents all across the United States took part in frantic shopping battles to secure Cabbage Patch Kids dolls for Christmas. Demand for the dolls far exceeded supply, leading to stampedes in stores, fights, and even injuries. Many people are not sure whether Scranton, Pennsylvania is a real city. The American version of The Office leads more than 400 British people a month and 110 Americans a month to search Google to find out whether Scranton is a real place. Research shows that starting school at 10 in the morning instead of 8 cuts student illness rates in half and improves academic performance. In 1995, a man received a junk mail check for $95,000. As a joke, he deposited it into his account. but the check met all the legal requirements for a valid check, and it was cashed. Every person in Singapore over the age of 21 is automatically registered as an organ donor. Choosing to opt out of this act will result in you being placed at the bottom of the organ priority list if you ever need an organ transplant. Orson Welles' final on-screen appearance was on the television show Moonlighting, where he read an introduction to assure viewers that the sudden switch to black and white was not a sign that something was wrong with their televisions. George Washington supposedly said before his death that he would never again set foot on English soil. So when a statue of him was erected in London, they actually placed American soil beneath the statue to honor that statement. Billy Joel never sells the front row seats so he can see the real fans right in front of him. He gives them away to random people in the cheapest seats so that the front row is not always occupied only by wealthy people. Minecraft became the first video game to surpass 300 million copies sold worldwide, a figure that works out to an average of about 47 copies sold per minute, every minute, since its launch in 2011. The hacker group Anonymous tried to attack a Mexican cartel and had to back down after the cartel hired counter-hackers to hunt them down. In 2018, a hacker broke into people's routers, more than 100,000 of them, and fixed their vulnerabilities so they could not be abused by other hackers. These kinds of hackers are called white hat hackers. During an interview with Stephen Hawking, a cameraman pulled on a cable, which triggered an alarm and caused Hawking to slump forward. Worried that they had killed him, everyone rushed toward him only to find Hawking laughing at his own prank. The alarm came from an office computer that had lost power. During the American Revolutionary War, more Americans died as prisoners of war on British prison ships than in all of the Revolutionary War battles combined. Larry Hillblum, the H in DHL, made regular trips to Asia and fathered several children there outside of marriage under highly controversial circumstances. When he died in a plane crash, 4 of those children were able to claim $50 million each from his estate. In the 1880s, the director of the Harvard Observatory was so frustrated with his staff that he said his Scottish maid could do a better job, so he ended up hiring her. Williamina Fleming went on to lead the so-called Harvard computers, classified tens of thousands of stars, discovered the Horsehead Nebula, and helped identify the nature of white dwarfs. Jerry West was a 10-time member of the All-NBA First Team, which makes him the only player in league history to make that many first teams without ever taking home at least one league Most Valuable Player award. He finished as runner-up a record 4 times. Michael Jordan scored 38 points against the Utah Jazz in 1997, despite suffering from vomiting and diarrhea caused by food poisoning. The shoes he wore in the flu game were later given to a Utah Jazz ball boy. According to a 2019 study that surveyed more than 1,000 employed Americans, 80% reported that they regularly experience work-related dreams, and more than 50% confirmed that they have had at least one nightmare about work. When a rare 400-year-old bonsai tree was stolen, the bonsai master gave instructions on how the thief could care for the plant so it would not die, because he felt it was his child. President Theodore Roosevelt was the only person ever to receive both the Nobel Peace Prize and the Medal of Honor. In 1916, there was a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution that would have subjected every act of war to a national vote, and anyone who voted in favor would have had to register as a volunteer for service in the United States Army. Drivers can face fines and up to 6 months of license suspension if they run out of fuel on the highway in Germany.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss more interesting content. Leave your comments and click on any of these videos. See you next time.